Welcome everyone to the Asher Marketing Podcast. We provide a wide range of services, including media planning, video production, creative solutions, digital and social media strategies, website development, public relations, and printing. To find out more, visit asheragency.com.
My guest is Julianne Verdi. Julianne, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for making the time. You know, I was reading your bio. You and I haven't met until this morning. You are, first and foremost, a mom of 4. Do I have that right?
Yes, 4 children.
So that alone tells me you have no time, but you're also the executive director of an advocacy organization. We're going to talk about that in detail. You're an attorney by training. You have some interests and have founded nonprofits in the past. You have a lot going on, so I really appreciate you being here. I want to get to how you manage all that in just a minute, but I'd like to hear a little bit about how you ended up with this multifaceted professional life. So I want to talk about your career path for a little bit. So as you were determining what you were going to do as an adult, did you know you wanted to be an attorney, or did you kind of stumble upon that later in life?
Yeah, I think I really stumbled upon that a little bit later in life. My path was definitely not linear, but I do think that there's a clear through line through my sort of career path. So, I think like everybody's story, my story starts in childhood. And though my father was in my life, I was mostly raised by a single mom. She actually worked in construction. And I actually, watched her growing up navigate disability. She got hurt on the job at the World Trade Center about 6 months before 9/11. And really faced both disability and gender discrimination in the workplace after she got injured. And that experience really shaped how I understood power, equity, and whose needs the systems are actually designed to prioritize. So that started to kind of shift, and that experience was sort of around high school, kind of shift what I thought I might do. Yeah. So, early in my career, I interned on Capitol Hill and later worked for one of the highest ranking legislators in New York State. And that's where I really learned kind of the power of policy and learn how policy gets made and how much impact government decisions can really have on people's day-to-day lives. And that behind the scenes, there's just actual people making those decisions on behalf of everybody else. And so I really realized at that point that to be a good advocate, I wanted to go to law school. And I felt like understanding the law was going to be really key to everything else that I wanted to accomplish. And so I built my early career in legal and government relations. And then, and a big part of that was my interest in sort of social justice issues and reproductive rights. And so I actually landed my dream job right out of law school, shortly after law school, working for a reproductive rights organization. And, I loved it. The work was really meaningful. The stakes were high. It really aligned with my values. But I became a mother during my time there. And that really challenged my assumptions of, what my dream life really was, right? I had this dream job, but it wasn't sort of meshing with my idea of what my dream life would be. I didn't have a great work-life balance. I was leaving in the morning. My child was still sleeping. I'd get home really late at night, be going to bed. And I was just missing all of these moments. And that was hard. And I didn't feel like I was getting the support I needed in the workplace to sort of manage being a new mom while also wanting a fulfilling career.
Yeah. Well, Julianne, I love that story because there's a couple of different things that I think will resonate with our audience. Number one, I mean, if there's one word that describes, from what I've seen from the outside looking in your career, it's advocacy, right? Really supporting those who need support. But what I find is a lot of people who believe in that concept sometimes have to make a tough decision where, because you're so committed to the causes outside of home, you end up being less of an advocate for your kids. So I love the fact that, you said, hey, I want to make an impact on the world, but one of the best ways I can make an impact is as a parent, right? The other question I want to ask you, I hope you don't mind, this is somewhat of a personal question. and I think it's important for young people to hear. What I'd like to ask you is, did you know that you wanted to have kids and have a family, or did that come later? Because so many people today are saying it's either or. I either have to have a career, and some people are saying in order to have a life, I can't have kids, right? And you're someone who, I know there must be tough days, but you've got 4 kids, you've got a demanding career, and you made a decision to say, I'm going to build my career around my life instead of vice versa. So what was that decision like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew pretty early on that I wanted to have a family. I think that was important to me, kind of just based on my own background and just, just the way I grew up. I wanted a family, and I wanted a different family than I think I necessarily grew up when. Obviously, my parents were divorced when I was very young, like 2 years old. And so I think because of that, it really drove that I wanted something different for my life. But I also knew I really wanted a career, right? I wanted to work. I never had any delusions of, it's still a hard thing, but I didn't want to only work in the household, right, and be a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to figure out how to do both, how to raise my kids and also have a fulfilling career. And, it's a challenge. And there are days where I feel like I am not doing a great job at either one, right? It is, I travel a lot for work now, and, we'll get into kind of what I'm doing now, but, I travel a lot for work. There's challenges there. But again, I sort of, once I made the decision to leave my full-time work and do something a little bit different, I was able to sort of ramp up as my kids got a little bit older. I was able to make different changes. But I think the other kind of piece of all of this, and I haven't hinted at this yet, but I faced some discrimination, in the workplace when I had a child. One of the things, at least perceived discrimination in my mind, when I was at, a reproductive rights organization, I got pregnant and had my first child while I was working there. And one of the things that happened was I went back to work. I had just, achieved something pretty big for the organization. I was proud. I had, of the work that I had done, really securing an incredible amount of funding to do some really, important work. And so my boss had asked, do you want to, do you think you can take on a little bit more and kind of, do this other piece of the puzzle, right? And I was excited. I was like, yes, I'd love that, more responsibility. But if my role is going to grow, is my salary going to grow with it, right? I think that's a reasonable question to
Seems
ask,
like a fair question, yeah.
And I was told specifically, you just came back from maternity leave. How would that look? Like something to the effect of that, right? And I said, well, it would look like I think this is my notice. Like I think this is not a good fit. And that really, it was really the wake up call I needed, that I wasn't being valued for the work that I did. I was, it was this perception that if you're a parent, you cannot be a good employee, right? And I think that is patently untrue, right? I think moms can absolutely do really incredible things. And I think one of the things, being a parent, you learn how to juggle multiple priorities. It's just like baked into the job of being a mom. And I actually think becoming a mother has made me better at everything I do in my career. But I think society as a whole doesn't always see it that way. And so figuring out, again, making a different decision and, really feeling like, well, I'm going to show it. I'm going to do it in my own way, and make sure that whatever I do in my life, that, my family life is going to be considered in those decisions.
Yeah, well, it appears very strongly that you're a great example of that. And I love that point, because there's problems on both sides, right? Sometimes employers think those who, don't have kids, well, we can tap into them at night and on the weekends, because what else do they have going on, right? So there's our society really needs to rethink that if we want to have stable families and if we want to have productive employees. Wow, we're getting really deep really fast. This is great. I appreciate it. Okay, so Julianne, your primary work, I think it's fair to say today, is with the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. And because that's a little bit of a mouthful from here on out, I'll just say AHDA, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Tell us what that organization does and what your role is, please.
Yeah, so the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy is about a 20-year-old nonprofit organization really committed to making life better for the 40 million Americans living with migraine and headache disorders. And primarily that organization does that through policy. So whether that be federal policy or state policy, really securing policy and regulations that support the lives of people living with these conditions. And I think, kind of to ground that work, I think everybody pretty much knows someone who lives with migraine, but I don't think folks understand how disabling this condition can really be. And that also migraine is not the only headache disorder that exists. There's actually almost 200 different diagnoses that fall under the headache disorders kind of umbrella. And so we're an organization that, supports all of those different patients and also the clinicians that treat them.
So, Julianne, I did a little research and found a podcast interview where you talked about living with migraine, So obviously, I'm certain that motivates you in that work. But did you find that work specifically because you've lived that experience, or was it kind of serendipity that the opportunity came and you said, here's another way for me to make a difference?
Yeah, it was really, I didn't seek it out. So, when I left the reproductive rights organization, what I decided to do at that point was to start my own law practice. And when I first started that law practice, I thought I was really going to be focused on, bylaws. I knew I wanted to kind of stick in the I wanted to really be focused on nonprofits. Like I have that sort of give back.
You founded a nonprofit, correct?
Yeah,
back in 2016?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that's sort of been my bread and butter. Like I really believe in, I really wanted to stay close to that work. So I started a nonprofit. I started a law practice where I was going to be working primarily with nonprofits. I really thought I was going to be providing really pure legal services. But once I started the law practice and I started working with nonprofits and primarily smaller nonprofits or emerging nonprofits, I really found what they needed was a lot of sort of wraparound services around nonprofit consulting more generally. And so my practice kind of evolved to being both law and nonprofit consulting. And I loved that work. I did everything from, running board meetings, program development, event planning, all of these sort of different things. So I learned so much. And at the same time, as I was starting my law practice, I also founded my own nonprofit doing, sort of social justice kind of grassroots organizing. And so I, was doing a lot of stuff on it, kind of organizing folks and, kind of doing movement building in the place where I was living, which was Staten Island, New York at the time. And so, then, so I was doing that for several years. And, obviously when you're a new business, you're always looking for new clients. And I was, found a job posting for, an executive director for this nonprofit that was in the headache and migraine space, but what had this, kind of policy focus. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity to combine my government relations background, my legal training, my leadership expertise and sort of nonprofit management, as well as grassroots organizing. And I have the lived experience of someone living with migraine. This was the perfect kind of combination. And, at the time they were not looking for someone full time at the time. So I was not looking for something full time. I was going to keep my own practice for a while. And so I thought, wow, this could work, kind of combining all of this. And so I took the job, and once I had the job, my son actually got diagnosed with migraine too, and so that really reinforced kind of my passion for this work, and really getting to meet the patients and clinicians on our board and everybody, and learning so much about this disease state that I had had for most of my life, but I didn't know all that much about. I knew that I had migraine. It was being treated for migraine. It was disabling. But I felt very alone in that because I didn't hear people talking about it. So all of a sudden I realized there's this whole community out there of people who know what it's like to live like with this condition. And it was such a wonderful experience. And that role has now moved to full time. So I'm now full time at the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. And we actually started so Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy, again, focuses on the policy perspective of this work. But we actually started an education and awareness nonprofit sister organization called the Headache Alliance, and I serve as executive director of both. So I'm doing both that, still that straight policy work, but also, the education and awareness building to really help the greater public understand the impact that migraine and headache disorders have on the country.
We're hitting pause for just a moment to talk about something that can transform your online presence: Asher Agency and their exceptional website services. In today's digital world, your website is often the first impression potential customers have of your business. Is yours making the right impact? At Asher, we specialize in creating stunning, custom, user-friendly websites that not only look great, but also drive results. Visit asheragency.com for more info.
Well, and another opportunity to be a resource and advocate for your son with what you're learning and helping him understand how to navigate the world. So that's great.
Yeah, actually, a quick story about that. So one of the things that one of our wins in the last couple of years actually was really inspired by my son and his journey, and that is around accommodations for children in school living with migraine. And so what we had found was different school districts were handling how they gave out accommodations to children living with migraine and headache disorders very differently. It really depended on the zip code. It could just depend on the specific school, never mind the school district. And we thought, hey, this isn't right. It's a disability just like asthma could be. It's a health condition that needs to be managed in the schools. Why is it being treated differently? And if you looked at the law, the law that sort of dictates the way school districts are supposed to be handling this, migraine and headache disorders fit very clearly in there. But because the Department of Education had never explicitly said, hey, migraine and headache disorders could rise to the level of needing accommodations, school districts just didn't understand it, right? That's that stigma behind the scenes, I think, on our disease state. And so what we did was we went to the Department of Education and said, hey, would you issue a guidance memorandum really just explaining that school districts have a responsibility to provide accommodations, reasonable accommodations for children living with migraine and headache disorders if the need arises. And they sort of said, well, yeah, of course, it's covered by the law already. We don't need to do anything. We said, well, you do need to do something because it's not being implemented in that way. And so we decided, since Department of Education didn't want to necessarily do this on their own, we were going to go to Congress and ask Congress to write a letter to try to, encourage the Department of Education to do so. And so that was one of our main asks for our Hill Day, which is called Headache on the Hill. It was something that we worked on for about a little over a year. And then in December 2024, that letter, so that letter went out in over the summer. And then in December 2024, the Department of Education actually issued the guidance memorandum, for the first time explicitly saying that children with migraine are eligible for 504 accommodations and even an IEP if the need arises. And this is such a powerful tool that parents and families can use when they're going into these conversations to help get their kids the support that they need in school. I see what a difference it makes for my own child, and I want every kid out there who is living with these conditions to have access to that same support system.
Well, congratulations in your role in getting that done. That's, I'm sure, was a great moment in your career to be able to say, move the needle a little bit in a positive way. Julianne, is it true, and I apologize, this question is coming out of complete ignorance, but is the reason why headache disorders are a little bit underappreciated because there's less of a tangible manifestation of them? In other words, if I have an asthma attack, people can see that. If I have a physical disability of one form or another, people can see that. But most of what's happening with migraine and other headache disorders, I'm not going to see that. Is that part of the challenge that you face?
I do think that's definitely part of it, right? And I think that just the other piece of it is that so many of us are just taught to just take some medication and move on, right? And for some people that works, right? You can just, I think most people have experienced a headache at one time or another. Maybe they drank too much the night before, whatever it is, right? They've experienced a headache. But it's very different than having a headache disorder, where this is something that is a recurring thing. And I think, understanding that, migraine, it's just my experience. And again, there's lots of other headache disorders, but I can speak from the experience of a migraine patient. When I'm experiencing a migraine, it is not just the pain, right? The pain is awful, right? And it makes everything harder. But I actually get other symptoms. I can get nauseous to the point of vomiting. I can have light sensitivity, smell sensitivity, sound sensitivity. I also get something called aphasia, where I actually have trouble communicating. And for someone whose this whole job is to speak to people, it's really disabling in the moment when all of a sudden my words are not flowing from my mouth as they are in my head, right? And then for some people, there is actually a really large physical component to it. There's a subtype of migraine called hemiplegic migraine, where during an attack, you can actually be paralyzed on one side of your body.
Wow.
So it can cause spatial drooping, and then, the inability to move your arm, your leg, or et cetera, on one side of your body. And so this is so much more than just a headache. But unfortunately, again, that stigma, I think, exists. I think part of it too is just the lack of research funding and investment in this space, and just that acknowledgement that this is something that is worthy of medical treatment, and that there are things out there that can help. So I think, yes, there's a heck of a lot of stigma out there, and it's a big part of what we're trying to do is push back against that, share those personal stories, explain exactly what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about migraine disease and headache disease in general.
So, Julianne, as we're kicking off a new year, what are some of your priorities near term? What are some of the things you're trying to get done, some of the things you're working on in 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, so the biggest one I'd say is the Headache Act. So in September of 2025, a federal piece of legislation was introduced in the House of Representatives called the Headache Act, and it is the first standalone bill for migraine and headache disease ever introduced. And it's something that we are so incredibly proud of and excited about. It focuses on improving data collection, strengthening care coordination, increasing research investment, and again, just that recognition that headache disorders are a serious cause of disability in this country, and that we need a federal plan to address this crisis of headache disorders in this country. And so a lot of our time is going to be really spent on advocating for the Headache Act and trying to get this bill passed, because we really think that this could change the game for our disease state, that this has been done in other diseases. So there's been Alzheimer's bills. More recently, there was a Parkinson's bill that passed a few years ago that does very similar thing. And so that's what we've sort of learned from and sort of based our bill off of. We're really, grateful for our leads in the House, Representative Lori Trahan and Brian Fitzpatrick, who are leading the charge on this bill in the House. And, we're working on getting introduced in the Senate and, working to get this bill passed. The second thing is actually less legislative, but again, is more of that sort of education and awareness building. We have a campaign that we started last year called Flags for Headache. And so what we did in June, which is Migraine and Headache Headache Awareness Month was to install a large-scale installation in front of the nation's capital. There were 30,000 purple flags. That's our awareness color for migraine and headache disorders is purple. Around the installation was, informational signage on what migraine and headache disorders are, how do they impact people, what are some of the issues, and then we had a dedicated website that really gave more information, where to get, more resources if you are someone living with this condition. And it was really about raising awareness and this visibility of this disease, really making migraine and headache disorders impossible to ignore. We were really excited that last year, advocates from across the country actually did micro installations on front lawns and in their towns across the country. And so we're really building on this again this year. The installation will be back in June of 2026 in Washington, D.C. We're hoping for some larger scale pop-up installations to happen across the country. And we really think that this is a fantastic campaign, really grounded in personal stories. We did these interviews of people living with migraine and headache disorders to really show what it is that we're actually talking about here. And we reached over 5 million people last year through this campaign, and looking forward to expanding that in year 2.
Well, and I would guess the two work hand in hand, right? You have to go directly to legislators, but hopefully it's still true that if their constituents believe it's important, they'll eventually see that it's important. So you got to work both angles.
Absolutely. I think they really are two efforts that really complement one another. Really, the Headache Act is about that systems change and long-term policy solutions. And the Flags for Headache campaign is really about, shifting culture, visibility, public understanding. And if we can do that, we should be able to, get the Headache Act passed. So I think both of those kind of working together towards this common goal, again, making life better for the 40 million Americans living with these conditions.
Well, excellent. I admire that work, and I wish you the best of luck in that work. So now I'm going to pivot to a few quick hit questions. Yep. The first one is, of all the guests we've had in 5 years, I'm kind of most interested in hearing your answer because you've had such a multifaceted career. What do you believe is the key to career success and fulfillment? And again, I want to reinforce, you're a mom of 4. You're an attorney by training. You're in the advocacy world. You've been in the nonprofit world. You've had a lot of experience that I think is valuable to hear about. So how do you boil that down to your best advice?
I think the biggest piece I would say is fighting against imposter syndrome. I think, I think for me, that has probably been the hardest piece. But if you are invited into a room, remembering that you earned your way there, right? And you deserve to be there, and it's okay to take up space at the table, to take that seat at the table. Don't apologize for it. And sort of build that confidence within yourself, because if you can do that, and it does not come naturally, it's something that you have to practice. I think that a lot of doors will open, right? If you can fight against that imposter syndrome and say, I deserve to be here, even if my path is not linear. And last week I was, maybe waiting tables or something like that, but you deserve to be where you are, when you get a win. And so it's okay to celebrate that. I also think, obviously networking is incredibly important, and it doesn't have to be super complicated. It's as simple as, sending a thank you note after an interview, right? I think that's a lost art. I was interviewing for an administrative role for our organization. I couldn't believe how many people didn't do that, right? It's a simple thing. Yeah. It doesn't have to be long. It's like, thanks for meeting with me. But that thank you note, you stick out in someone's mind when you do that. So that's just a simple thing that everybody can do. And then I think LinkedIn is just amazing, right? And thoughtful posts are a great way to sort of network, establish your personal brand, especially early in your career. Even if you don't feel like you're an expert yet, you can fake it till you make it a little bit.
Yeah, well, I love all three of those points. Those who know me know I'm a huge LinkedIn nerd. I'm not on most social media, but I'm on LinkedIn every day. The thank you note, I always tell people if you walk around our office at Asher, no one prints out an email that says thank you and puts it on their wall, but you see a lot of thank you cards up on the wall because it hits different, right? And then imposter syndrome, what my shtick is on imposter syndrome is that it's a litmus test for whether or not you're a decent human being. If you have imposter syndrome, it means you have some humility. It's a burden, right? But it's a good sign if you have it. I've met people who don't have it, and they're people you don't want to spend a lot of time with.
I love that.
So
Absolutely.
the second question has to do with the work you do, and it's multifaceted. So take this wherever you want to go. What's a myth or misconception that you would like to debunk, or perhaps something that's not well enough understood that you want to amplify?
Yeah, I think again that migraine and headache disorders are not just a headache. That headache disorders are one of the leading causes of disability worldwide, and especially for women during their prime working years. They can affect education, employment, family life, and can be a mental health issue. This isn't just like a niche little side thing. It's something that impacts our entire healthcare system. It drives incredible healthcare costs, both absenteeism and presenteeism in the workplace. It's estimated that $78 billion a year is what the economic cost of uncontrolled migraine and headache disorders are in the US alone. And so I think, that's a lot of misconception out there. I think another thing is that advocacy is really only driven by, by strategy, right? And lobbyists and all of those things. And it's just political insiders, right? I think that really what the core of advocacy is storytelling. And, at its very core, I always tell our advocates when I'm training new people to go on the Hill and talk to members of Congress that, if statistics alone were enough to change hearts and minds, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here right now having, the conversation with members of Congress because we have that on our side. I just spouted off a bunch of stats, right? We know that headache disorders are important and they impact a lot of people, and we have all of these stats, but it's not enough. It is the personal story. It is the personal connection to somebody in the district who can talk about how, they were, a teacher and they loved their career, but, their migraine and headache disorder got so bad that, they had to leave the workplace, or, the mom who made the decision not to have more children because she couldn't stay off her medication long enough to do so because it was so out of control, right? These are the personal stories that are what's going to change hearts and minds. And that is really the heart of all of this. Advocacy at its core, I think, at least the advocacy that I practice, is really based on that storytelling and that personal connection. I think without it, you are just the shill with lobbyist or whatever, right? I think at the end of the day, the reason I'm doing this work, the reason I'm passionate about it, is because of the real people behind the scenes that I know I'm advocating for.
Yeah, love it. And I love the storytelling piece. I'm not a big business books guy, but the book Made to Stick, which is pretty well known, does a great job of talking about the fact that statistics don't matter much unless they're contained in a story, because people don't care until someone they care about is affected. And then there's another book that gets less attention. It's called Contagious: Why Things Catch On, by an author named Jonah Berger. And he does a great job too of talking about why stories matter. And there's actually science behind it that really demonstrates, and I'm not smart enough to talk about the science, but I can read books that talk about the science. He talks about the fact that if you're going to move the needle in the way that you are, you have to frame it in a story, or the statistics will be forgotten the minute they hit someone's ears. So great advice. Okay, last one. What is a tool, a trick, tip, hack, whatever you want to call it, something that you use in your work that helps you be more efficient, be more effective, get things done?
Yeah, I would say I live in Slack and Asana. So that's how I, manage complex projects, teams, keeping on track. I think when you're an executive director of a small nonprofit, you wear about 17 different hats at least at any given time. And so, keeping that project management again, and on that, there's also all the as a mom, all of the other stuff, right? Like having this, like you have to be organized. My desk is, absolutely disorganized. So if you looked at that, you'd be like, this. What is she talking about organization? But my digital organization, those to-do lists, the communication in Slack is, really the best way that I kind of keep myself on track. I think the real hack, though, is again that work-life balance and, figuring out how to manage burnout, because burnout doesn't produce good leadership or good strategy at the end of the day. This is something that I am absolutely still working on. It's a work in progress, but and I think I sort of it kind of ebbs and flows where, I'm doing well with it. And then other days I'm like, I'm putting in way too many hours, right? But I think, figuring out and really prioritizing self-care and that work-life balance is absolutely key to having the stamina to continue, I think movement building work, which is sort of all encompassing all of the time. And so, still working on it, but I think if I can master that hack, I will be, perfect in my career.
Well, you're obviously doing a lot of things right. And I think one of the important messages there is that work-life balance isn't something you get minute to minute or even day to day. It's over the course of decades. Do you give the right attention to the right things in the right proportion, right? My wife and I talk about this often because she has I won't say aging parents, but her parents are getting older. Young daughter, demanding career, friends, a husband who demands a lot of attention, right? And you're never going to do all those things well on any given day. But if you give the right attention to the right things at the right time, you can't have everything, but you can have all those things, right? You're going to have to say no. One of the things I was impressed about with you, Julianne, is the fact that we were scheduled for 9:00 and you showed up at 9:00, right? I'm a big believer in don't be early, don't be late, be on time. And I think when you do as many things as you do, you have to kind of master that. So you've got that going for you, even if nothing else. I think
it's intent, and I think the other thing about, this work-life balance is it's a practice, right? It's something that you don't just, like you said, you don't just get it and it's sustainable, right? It's something that you have to be practicing every moment of your career and family life. It is something that it's an ongoing thing. And again, it's going to ebb and flow. That's okay. But, prioritizing rest and boundaries and sustainability is really the key.
Well, I admire everything you do and really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. I know you have a lot going on, and thanks for giving us part of your day.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun.
And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Azure Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to reach out to us at hello@ashereagency.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners. For additional resources and updates, visit our website at ashereagency.com. Thanks for tuning in.